Okay, so welcome to the second Alchematics Lunch and Learn session. Today we're going to be discussing interviewing and onboarding in the new world. If you've attended the first session, you know that we tend to keep these introductions quite brief. So I'll just say that obviously I'm joined by my good friend and managing director of Alchematics, Richard Ritchie. And everyone say hi to everyone, Rich.
Morning, everyone. Or afternoon, rather. It is afternoon, even to go. So let's get straight into it then, Gareth. Before we look specifically at interviewing and onboarding, tell me, how are we defining the new world?
Well, Rich, I think like many people, we're seeing the new world with regards to the impact that the pandemic has had. So there's an acceptance in the service sector and certainly in the kind of normal office environment. The remote working that the pandemic has forced on the global community is going to continue. There's a number of research articles have demonstrated that there was this kind of movement towards this more flexible or remote working, but the effect of the pandemic is that has really moved on kind of a decade. But I've got to say, Rich, you know, a number of the people that I'm talking to in the HR world are highlighting that when the pandemic restrictions are removed, there's definitely an appetite to balance their time between remote working and time in the office.
So don't you think that a 100% virtual workplace will dominate the future?
I don't. I think there are a few companies that will work 100% virtually, but I think the vast majority are going to be looking to strike this kind of balance. One of the things that's come up in a lot of the discussions that I've been having is the impact that it's having on people working remotely continuously. So I think that a lot of companies will be looking from the point of view of the mental and physical health of their employees. But I think that's probably a topic for a future discussion. And obviously, what we will be seeing over the course of the next kind of 12 to 18 months is a continued increase in the amount of virtual onboarding and recruitment that's going to need to take place.
Yeah. Okay. Before we get into the recruitment, I just want to mention something quick. I had a conversation with a friend of mine who works at Google in San Francisco over the weekend, and he explained a really interesting dynamic that's taking place there. Obviously, a lot of these companies in Silicon Valley, you know, a lot of people want to move, work for these companies because of the campus, right? Like Facebook, for example. The part of the culture of the company is where they're working. Now they're forced into a situation whereby they don't have access to this campus, if you like. What's interesting is that whilst in a lot of parts of the world, companies have had to let staff go, reducing wages to maintain some kind of business normality. People at these organizations are actually trying to negotiate higher wages based on the fact that the reason they first joined these companies, i.e. the culture, the campus they have access to, is no longer available and will likely be less available to them in the future. I just thought that was an interesting dynamic that seems to be emerging in Valley.
It is, that's fascinating. I mean, it's the value proposition that the employees getting from the company. And I think that kind of reinforces what I was saying there with regards to companies looking for a balance between remote working and office working, particularly when a large part of their kind of company or commercial identity is based on pulling employees together in those massive campuses, etc., that the Google have. But yeah, I still think that from the HR professional's perspective, there's going to need to be a continued focus on the practices that we employ when we look at virtual recruitment and virtual onboarding.
Yeah. Okay. So let's look at recruitment first then. Tell me a bit more about this.
Okay. So I'm going to make a few assumptions with regards to the listeners today, and obviously there's probably groups. We're probably talking to some people that are involved as recruiters, and some that will be looking at more from the point of view of being the interviewee. They're looking for roles. So I think that one of the things I would get across is I think that there's probably a likelihood that the bad practices that occur in face-to-face interviewing currently could spill over into the virtual world. So I think it's really important. We look at interviewing, we understand what we're trying to do, what we're trying to achieve. We're not trying to trip people up. Ultimately, we want to get a good understanding of the person that's sat in front of us. Now, typically when you're interviewing a candidate, their CV has got them there. Their CV has highlighted their education, their experience, etc. And based on those factors, you've made the decision that that individual could do the job. The interview itself is ultimately about establishing whether or not they're going to fit within your organization and they're going to fit with your management style or the team that you're looking to put them in. I mean, when we launched Credit Safe in the UK in 2002, we did it with a mind that we wanted to make sure that the group we had was quite diverse. So we actively encouraged our interviewers to adopt this mindset of avoiding what we use. It's a fantastic term, homosocial reproduction, and we took that term from a book called Funky Business. And ultimately, what it talks about is when you're interviewing, you can obviously fall into a situation whereby if somebody is very much like you, you'll have a rapport with them, you're going to like them, and there's an increased likelihood that you're going to take them on. So it's about being very clear about the sort of candidate that you need for the role that you're hiring for. The other thing that comes up in a lot of discussions that I have with within the HR community is this kind of old school interviewing technique where people are pressure tested and that kind of thing. I remember once somebody that he was very proud of the interview that he just conducted for a receptionist and placed that person under an enormous amount of stress within the interview process in a pressure test kind of environment. And you're just thinking, there's a lot of things that take place in these face-to-face interviews that just aren't needed. And the problem here is that when you're in that virtual world, those kind of ridiculous practices are going to be emphasized because people will have more time to question why they're going through a certain process, if that makes sense. I mean, we talked the other day about some of the other factors with regards to the kind of virtual interviewing. And one of the things that really strikes me is that when you're in a face-to-face interview situation and you've got the candidate turns up to your office, they have that opportunity to essentially taste what it's going to be like working for your company. They walk into the building, they see other people that are working there, maybe interact with one or two, meet the receptionist, get the opportunity to maybe take a coffee and sit there observing what's going on in the office. Suddenly, in the virtual, all of that is lost. So we've got to be very mindful that the interview process itself becomes slightly different in as much as maybe we have to sell the company. We've got to give that candidate an understanding of what it means to work for our business. So suddenly the interview becomes slightly more difficult. We're not just there to assist the candidate, we're also there to make sure that they want to work for us.
It's a very good point, the fact that because obviously working in the recruitment business, that's essentially all we do is sell companies to candidates, right? Especially when we're looking at passive candidates rather than people that are actively looking for a new role. So having for us to gain that deeper understanding of a company setup, why someone would work for them is critical for us to enable us to do our job. But yeah, 100%, I can see why perhaps in the past there's almost this, it could certainly be an element of complacency when someone's coming to your office. The assumption is, look, you can see how great we are, clearly you want to work with us, you're taking time of your day to come and be interviewed. It's almost like an assumption that the power lies totally with the employer, the interviewer, rather than the interviewer. When, like I say, this dynamic shifts slightly in the virtual world, because now you're 100% correct, I agree with that. We have to sell our businesses a lot more, and perhaps the way that's done, the people that are responsible for selling it, be they the hiring managers or maybe even the HR team, maybe not used to doing that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because like you said, we've been used to that almost happening, for want of a better word, accidentally. You know, we've all been in that situation. Yeah. Excuse me, where as the interviewer, you're running from meeting to meeting. Maybe you need to buy yourself a few minutes. So you encourage the candidate to sit there with a cup of coffee, and by the time you're actually sat in that interview, they've already got a pretty good picture of what it means to work for your organization. All of that is lost. Yeah. So we've got to be, within the interview process, we've got to be far more structured. We've got to make sure that we're prepared and ready to go on time. But also, like you said, that dynamic shift, we've got to make sure that the people that are conducting these interviews have that skill set, that they have the ability to sell the organization that you work for. Another key factor. Sorry, Rich.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, let's kind of roll it forward and start talking about the process from the interviewer's perspective then.
So, I mean, one of the key things that I think happens within the virtual world is suddenly, again, coming back to this dynamic shift, the candidate is not in your office. You're being invited into their world. The interview, typically, they're going to be sat in their living room. And I think, I'm not sure, Rich, if your HR network in Dubai gets the same sort of magazines as we do from the CIPD in the UK, but there's a fantastic article. I don't know if you can see this. Fantastic article covered on the front page of this month's People Management, where they talk about the unconscious bias that can occur. And within that picture that you saw there, you've got this individual who's being interviewed. There's a rocking horse in the background, and the question, it's obviously slightly exaggerated, but the question is, somewhere in your mind, are you thinking, hang on a second, this role that I'm interviewing this person for is quite high pressured, and there's a lot of responsibility. That rocking horse suggests that this person's got children. Now, obviously, the situation we find ourselves in with regards to homeschooling and that kind of thing, is this person going to be able to provide the focus that I need for this role? Well, of course, how can we make that assumption based off a fleeting glance at something on a video? But it will happen. So I think when we talk about the development of the skill sets that are required in this virtual world, we've already highlighted this kind of increased importance on being able to sell the organization. Understanding and managing your own kind of biases within the interview process is going to be key.
It's definitely see how that influence everybody. Whether we like it or not, we all pass fleeting judgments over people based on what we see in the background. But then that throws the question: then, does that imply that virtual backgrounds should be used, or plain backgrounds that have?
I mean, if we flip this on its head and we look at it from the interviewee's perspective, there's another kind of, I guess, golden nugget of information there, because as the interviewee, we understand that the interviewer may have these unconscious biases, so we need to take that into account. We need to make sure that when we're looking at our, say it again, sorry.
We could stage the background of our apartment to suit the what we believe is going to appeal to the interviewer.
Well, you know, you laugh about that. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if the listeners will have seen this, but there's a fantastic clip on YouTube recently, and it's an interview of sorts. It's an audition. So you've got this guy who's being auditioned for a part in a film. Now, there's two lessons that you learn from this video clip, and one is with regards to the bias that can actually predominate. So the interviewer is looking at the auditionee, sorry, and starts passing comment on the guy's flat and how poor quality this flat is. So first, there's an example of this bias that we're talking about. But secondly, and a very important factor when you're conducting these virtual interviews, is understand the technology, because he's making these comments with microphone turned on. So the questionee suddenly is sat there listening to this kind of critique of the flat that he lives in. He reacts in a wonderful way. But as an interviewer, these are things that we've got to get used to within this virtual world. You've got to make sure the equipment and the technology that you're working with is something that you're conversant with and you're going to be able to use effectively. You need to have that ability to sell your organization, and you need to be aware of and try to manage that unconscious bias that is overwhelmingly going to be there.
So talk to us, there's another when we had this discussion, that was regarding timekeeping as well. Yeah, so the fact that these now conduct, there's less flexibility, right?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, we were talking about it just now, weren't we? You know, in the office, you've got that, I guess, luxury of being able to say to someone, look, I'm really sorry, I'm going to be a few minutes, grab a coffee, take a seat over there, take a walk around the office. You don't have that now. That person is scheduled a call with you, you're being invited into their world. The other thing we've got to think of here, I mean, we spoke about the skills of the interviewer in selling the organization. But as much as there's conscious bias associated with the interviewer and what they can see, they'll be exactly the same from the candidate. So when the interview is being conducted, the person that is engaged in that interview, they need to think about the environment that they're interviewing from as well. Are we actually sat in the office when we're conducting these interviews? Are we at home? Because that's going to give an indication to the individual as to the sort of people they're going to be working with within the organization. I mean, again, kind of flipping it on its head and looking at it from the interviewee standpoint, because again, I'm assuming some of your listeners will be coming from that perspective. Talked about the background, other little things that we need to manage. You know, if houses are shared or you live with family, etc., making sure that people understand the process that you're about to go through, so you don't have interruptions. Making sure that the pets aren't diving around in the background. Anything that could be a distraction and potentially impact the way the interview is kind of perceiving you is going to be key. And when you look at a number of interviews will require some sort of presentation. Again, I would always emphasize practice, practice, practice. So understand the technology you're going to be working with. If your presentation is going to be PowerPoint, etc., make sure that you understand how to share that. And finally, I guess, as with any interview, whether it's virtual or face-to-face, it's so important that interviewees do their homework. Understand the company that you're interviewing with. Understand the role that you're interviewing for, and marry that with your experience and your qualifications. Make sure you're selling yourself in the best way possible.
Yeah, 100%. So we've got a couple of questions that I'll just read out. So Steve has a question regarding personality profiling. What is the role of personality profiling in this virtual world?
Okay. I'll be completely honest, and again, some of your listeners may not agree with me. I really don't like personality profiling within an interview process, whether that be physical, you know, the normal interview, or the virtual world, because I think it becomes a bit of a distraction. I mean, let me ask you this question, Rich. Have you ever been engaged in a personality profiling exercise?
Yes, I have a number of them, but to be honest, they weren't at the point of job application. They were as part of a leadership development team, so that we can understand our peers and form a stronger, tighter unit. Not at the interview stage. I agree with you. I've been required to review these things to interview staff in organizations I worked for in the past, but in all honesty, I pushed them to one side because I don't believe they give me what I need. They help me when it comes to managing someone or working with someone, but from whether or not someone's going to get the job or not, I haven't seen the value in them.
I mean, I think I would echo exactly what you've said. I certainly see value in the use of personality profiling when you're in role, and certainly with leadership teams. I think that it can help with understanding communication and how maybe you need to amend your communication to kind of better hit the mark with others. But with regards to interviewing and using it as any sort of sifting tool, I just think it's quite dangerous, because I think you can actually lose very good candidates or see less value in candidates because of some perception that's formed as a result of a few boxes that they've ticked on a personality profile. So to the individual that asked the question, I think that personality profiling, does it have a place? Yes. Not within the interview process, certainly when people are engaged and you're looking at improving the dynamic within the organization.
So there's another question from Caroline, and this is regarding the number of people in interview panels. So again, keeping the theme is in the virtual world, obviously. Yeah, would you have 5 people on one in this kind of situation?
Again, it's dependent on the role that you're interviewing for. I think that you can certainly include panels, but what I would say, I mean, as we're seeing here today, when you're involved in virtual discussion, it's very nice to be able to see everybody's face. Now, certain technology doesn't allow large numbers to stay on the screen simultaneously, and I think that can become a little bit off-putting if you're not seeing the faces of the people that are interviewing. One thing that people may want to consider, I'm really conscious of time as well, because we're still on interview and we're 25 minutes in. But I mean, one of the things that you can consider is, instead of having large panels, is you can explain to the interviewee that the interview will be recorded and will be reviewed by a number of others within a panel, so that the interview can be slightly more intimate, and then you still give other people the opportunity to make assessment. Okay,
makes sense. Okay, yeah, you're right. In the interest of time, let's skip ahead now to onboarding. Give me a bit of background to this, Gareth.
So I mean, in CreditSafe, over the course of the pandemic period, we've onboarded probably around 31 people, and we've gone through some challenges. I mean, we'd launched a new entity in a new country 4 months before the pandemic hit. So we had maybe 2 or 3 people that we'd hired pre-pandemic, and after that, everybody has been hired virtually, has been onboarded virtually, and it's been a really steep learning curve for us, because again, I mean, there are so many parallels with the interview and the recruitment dynamic. You're so used to having that opportunity to bring people into the office, sit down with them, have that conversation about what it means to work for the company, then take them on a tour of the offices, and again, kind of socialize them and allow them to understand what the culture is about, and give them the opportunity to just go out and kind of almost do it on their own. You've got a structured element, and then you've got an open element where people can go out and socialize with people within the organization. Suddenly overnight, we've lost that. We've lost that ability to the water cooler conversations. You know, I think when you look at the magic of onboarding, people know the role that they're coming into. If you've got the good candidate, their CV is highlighted that they've got the experience and the qualifications. The interviewer has suggested that they're going to fit in within the organization. They know their role. Socializing is the most important part of the onboarding process. So suddenly we've lost a lot of the flexibility associated with that. I mean, I'm going to again assume that all of the listeners that are involved in onboarding have a structure in place with regards to bringing people into the organization. And it's not too difficult to transition tutorial sessions to e-learning or virtual.
Sorry, Gary. Now, just to interrupt, Simon just mentioned something in the comments. He said, what is your experience with Pecha Kucha? So just to clarify, for those who haven't used Pecha Kucha as part of the onboarding process, Pecha Kucha is I think it's Japanese, but essentially what it is a short presentation, 20 slides, each 20 seconds. So you've got about 4 minutes to essentially explain who you are, and it's visual. So each slide is a different picture representing something from your past, be it your childhood, previous job experiences, hobbies. And the idea being, this is we've used it in businesses I've worked in the past, and I think it's a fantastic way to expose yourself to some extent, if you forgive the term, just to give people a bit of insight into who you are, where you're from, and how you're made up, if that makes sense. You know, you talk about the fact that socializing, we don't have it in the onboarding in the new world. I think this perhaps could be something that would really help break down barriers in the early stages, because it gives you a very quick insight into who someone is, and immediately gives you access to, okay, how I may be able to relate to this person. Does that make sense?
It certainly does, and I mean, to your point, Rich, I think it's a good process, and it encourages people to share. Issue for me is that obviously, if you're an introvert, joining an organization, you know, imagine it's going to be incredibly difficult for you as the extrovert that I know that you are. But imagine yourself as an introvert and walking into an organization virtually, and the onboarder saying, okay, here's what you're going to do. We want 20 slides that expose us to your innermost workings and the secrets of your life. How comfortable are you with that? Not very. So I think that the concept definitely works. I think that it's just about making sure that the briefing is maybe tailored to the group that you're working with.
But don't you think there's almost and perhaps this is the extrovert in me saying this, but don't you think even if you are an introvert, you have to accommodate such things in this day and age? Because how else can someone be expected to get to know you? Or is that just me completely
No. The thing is that we've got to be mindful of the fact that there are going to be people that would take a lot longer to warm up to a group of people. So I think that what you can do is just loosen the brief slightly around Pecha Kucha, and just give people the opportunity to comment on things that people should know about them. For instance, it's just subtle variations in the sort of language that's used to make sure that people feel comfortable in engaging in the exercise. I mean, the thing is, I think that, again, looking at the time, we're really kind of close to the mark now. But I think that when you look at the onboarding process in the virtual world, I would say that the key kind of things to consider: one is an increased emphasis on structure and time management, making sure that the process is well oiled. Ensuring that new starters are clearly signposted as to what they need to accomplish over the course of their first 5 to 7 days. Preparing meetings and facilitating those meetings with key personnel, again from a socialization perspective, making sure that they know who to go to and for what. I would say the final thing that I would really emphasize is having somebody owning that person's induction. Because of the fact that it's virtual, I would always suggest at least a daily check-in, ideally first thing in the morning and last thing at night, just to gauge and understand how their induction day has gone, and to see where there may be need for sort of amendment of the schedule for future days. And we've overrun, and that's my, I apologize.
We just have one question I do want to cover before we go, because I think it's quite important. Sarah wrote this by email before the session. I'll just read it out to you, because I gave her an insight into what we're going to be discussing today. She says, we're a startup. We don't have the resource for the kind of structure that you've just endorsed. So what can we do?
Okay, it's a difficult one, because I mean the induction process and the onboarding process does require some level of resource. So I think what you need to look at there is where you can create opportunities for the individual to learn about the organization without that interaction with people. So it's making sure that you've got good kind of documentation, good recruitment websites and that kind of stuff, where you're highlighting what the organization is about, so that you can put that individual in a position whereby they can learn, and then you can check in with them afterwards. So you're reducing the kind of human resource element during the onboarding and induction.
Okay, perfect. Listen, thank you very much for your time today, Gareth. It's been extremely insightful for me, as I hope it was for some of our listeners. Thanks very much for the questions, guys. We'll be back here next month. I think next month we'll be discussing slightly more sales focused, but that will be a focus on selling via video conference. So hope you join us. See you next month, guys.